Now, more stories, insights, and analysis of Illinois policy and politics. This is Illinois Rising, presented by the Illinois Policy Institute. Once again, your host, AM 560's Dan Proft.
Dan Proft back with Michael Lucci, Vice President of Policy at the Illinois Policy Institute. And Michael, this is, again, maybe kind of down the list of priorities, but it's something you hear a lot from aspiring entrepreneurs in Illinois, how difficult it is to do the simplest things as compared to other states, like get a business license, get a construction permit. These simple things, more difficult in Illinois, like so many things are, than in a lot of other states.
That's right. And specifically in Chicago, we have a situation where the United States Chamber of Commerce put out a report last year where they called Chicago a dystopian nightmare for entrepreneurs. And they said, getting one piece of paper, your business license for a professional service business, takes 32 days. Meanwhile, we learned this story about Phoenix, Arizona, completely other end of the spectrum, where they set up what they call a 24-hour city, which means if you want to start a business, you can do your licensing, site selection, inspection, and general regulations all done within a day. Nothing stops the entrepreneur from getting on the ground and running. And that's a new model that we think would be great to spread across the state of Illinois, but also the country, so that entrepreneurs can get going and get started with their business.
So 1/32 of the time it takes to get a license in Chicago, in Phoenix, which is not as big as Chicago, but it's a major city. Let's talk about that some more with Len Gilroy, who is the Director of Government Reform at the Reason Foundation. Len, thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
So describe the Phoenix policy and the impetus for it and the projected impact.
Sure. Well, Phoenix decided to make a significant change to its residential and commercial construction permitting process, really during the depths of the recession. And the impetus for it was pretty simple. I mean, you had a city that was, going through major, just like many others, going through a major economic crisis and looking to spark jobs and economic development. And so rather than trying to have government sort of force economic development, as we so often see, they decided to try to loosen the reins on the market from a regulatory perspective. So what they did was they basically implemented what they call a self-certification model for that permitting process. And really this covers the bulk of the types of either new construction or, remodeling, that sort of thing in residential and commercial construction. And basically the program allowed architects and engineers who would go through a city training program and would subject themselves to random audits from the city to allow those folks to submit plans for those residential and commercial construction projects, so like opening a new restaurant, building a new restaurant, expanding, that sort of thing, and then get approval on those permitting or those permits in a 24-hour period.
Yeah, but Len, I don't understand how this works, and I'm just going from my experience in Chicago, because 24 hours, it doesn't give you enough time to get tickets to sporting events for the building inspectors or take them out for dinner. So how do you build in all that stuff in just 24 hours?
Right. Well, the answer is you don't, and you take the reins off the marketplace and let it function. And what the city has found in the years since implementing that, they've got now I think around over 200 of these architect and engineering firms that are certified for doing this sort of process. You've had hundreds of millions in construction projects that have gone through that process. You still have city inspectors that will come after, at the end of the day, want to ensure, sort of the safety aspects of those projects are adhered to. But in terms of the permitting, as you probably see in Chicago and as we've seen in many other places, when you have uncertainty in that process and you don't know how long it's going to take you to build your restaurant or to expand the kitchen or add the piece onto your home, but particularly in the commercial context, that time is money. And the time that it takes getting stuck in a permit process where you don't know who's looking at the permit when and you don't know how long it's going to take, that uncertainty adds up to some major costs and delays. And that the longer it takes you to get the project built, the longer it takes before you can hire someone. And,
Yeah, I think that the contrast with Chicago is interesting because what this ultimately affects, when you say time is money, well, who doesn't have money? The low-income entrepreneur, the new guy who really is just starting out, who does have money? The already established guys, so they could wait the system out. I mean, it's actually a protectionist system in a number of ways. But would you say it's correct that this puts the city in the position of being an auditor rather than a birth-to-death regulator of the entire startup process?
I would. I think that's a good analogy. They basically set the framework. They allow private entities who choose to participate in that program to go and learn how it works and to subject themselves to that kind of auditing and oversight process. And then you're off to the races in terms of development. And the city still gets its sort of backstop of making sure that the safety aspects of the development process are adhered to. But they've even privatized a little bit of that, the non-safety aspects of that, things like making sure the landscaping is, what was promised, and we have green building codes, that sort of thing, things that are not life or death safety situations. Even that stuff has even been partially privatized and sent to the private sector to, expedite even sort of the tail end of that kind of development process too. And so the folks, and this was a bipartisan move. This was not a Republican versus Democrat or left versus right kind of issue. There's a bipartisan group of city council folks who pushed this and approved it. And so far, I think that they view this as very successful.
It's very interesting because in Chicago we have a bipartisan group of well-heeled permit expediters that make a living off of the kleptocracy that is Chicago. So completely different model. Very interesting. Len Gilroy, Director of Government Reform at the Reason Foundation. Thanks so much for joining us. Appreciate it.
Thank you.